Life Stories. You mentioned prayer, of course, and your friend Phil prayed for you. How important is prayer to you in your life today?
Well, it's really important. At the moment, for all of us, we're going through a continually difficult time. And myself and Ethan and Dorina moved a few weeks ago, but for quite some time, it didn't look like this house move was going to come off. It was hugely stressful. And we got into the habit of doing this thing called seven in seven. So what we decided to do was put a reminder on our phone at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. every day to pray about some of these issues. And one of the issues is also Ethan finding a secondary school, which at the moment he's due to start at a new school in September, but currently doesn't have one because of just moving. So we try and get into the habit. Sometimes we're better than others, but we're trying to get back into it again, of taking those things that need praying for, that we need God's guidance with, and we need his help on, in just remembering to do that twice a day at 7 o'clock. And we find it really helpful, and it's a discipline as well, isn't it? Prayer, it's about flexing that muscle. It's about muscle memory. So that's something we do. So, it's hugely important. It underpins who we are as people.
That's a very good tip. Now, of course, you moved on to Sky Sports, a whole new ball game, shall we say?
Nice.
So did you move in there with trepidation? What did you expect when you went in there? What was it like?
Yeah, there was a little bit of trepidation, George, because you've kind of got to prove yourself again. You've come from a kids program, and now you're in the macho world of sports. And I think there were one or two who were a little bit curious as to why a Blue Peter presenter just turned up at Sky Sports. One or two were, I'd say, a little bit cynical about whether I could do it. But I went into it with my eyes wide open. I knew that I had the raw skills, broadcasting wise, as in I can talk to a camera. I know all the technical terms. So I don't have to worry about that. I can focus on becoming a good sports presenter stroke journalist. So it was like learning a new trade, but I already had some of the tools in the bag to help me do that. So it was hard at first. You kind of had to win people over a little bit and just prove you're not just a kids presenter. You get, particularly with Blue Peter, you get very pigeonholed. True. I still, even though I left the program in 2005, still people will go, "Oh, I used to watch you on Blue Peter." I get a lot saying, obviously, the Sky Sports stuff as well, but you do get pigeonholed. And I think it took a while for people to take me kind of seriously and realize actually he could be quite good at this.
Now, we as viewers only see the finished product, of course, on TV, and everybody's looking great. But how much research and work did you have to put into the programs before you actually went live and presented them?
Well, I can tell you, sort of recently, I've gone back to doing some live football. So I presented some games for Amazon over Christmas, and then a few games into the new year. And really, the way I prepared for those games was no different to what I did at Sky. And really, I mean, research, hard work, preparation is your best friend, because it's that famous saying, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And live TV, live sports broadcasting, where you're, ultimately you sit down there and the story of that game is about to unfold, and it could go in any direction. So you've got to prepare for everything. So if I had a game on a Saturday, probably obviously make sure every day you're reading as many of the sports pages as you can, to see what the various opinions are on the teams you're about to cover at the weekend and others. And by the Wednesday, you get what was called a stat pack, which for a Premier League game is around about 60 pages long. And it's got history of the clubs, the head-to-head records, their current form, and then big biographies on every single player.
Wow.
And you then begin to pick out, I make my own then 2 stat sheets. I pick out the information I think I'm most likely going to need. And then by the Thursday, you're probably having a phone call. I mean, you used to be back in the day when we could actually go into offices. You'd go into the office at Sky, you'd sit down with your producer, and you'd go through the way you want that hour-long build-up to look. What are the key talking points? What are we going to get out of the guests we've got this weekend? And then probably by the Friday, once I knew what the running order was for a game on a Saturday, then I'd write my script and work out what are going to be the best words that are going to describe what this game means, how big it is for the players, how big it is for the fans. And then you probably used to get about 2 hours rehearsal on the day, maybe not even that actually. And you get to the ground, have a quick bit of breakfast. It was a lunchtime game on a Saturday, and then get into the studio at about 11 o'clock. Go through everything, then wait for the team news, which literally came 15 minutes before you went on air. And then at 11:30, you were on air. So that's what would go into every single game.
Now, you mentioned opinions, of course, on Sky, and we have lots of people with opinions, pundits and what have you. Have you ever had to, say, come between two pundits when they disagreed on their opinions?
Hi, sorry, can you just say that again?
Have you ever had to come between two pundits?
I wouldn't say come between. I mean, that's the best telly when it gets heated. You know,
Yes.
that's what you want in pundits. You don't want people who just, you know, just tell you the obvious. You want to know why that's happened and why you're unhappy about that decision that was made. And it's really good telly when someone comes back at them and says, well, I actually don't see it like that. I mean, Graham Souness is, you know, it can be quite an adversary in the studio. You know, he'll take people on, and you know, him and Jamie Carragher, who I did a number of games with, would sometimes come to blow, and they both used to play for Liverpool, but they would disagree on stuff. But that, as a presenter, is a joy, because that's what you want. That's what people remember. It's just as long as the points they're making are good ones and actually valid, and not just getting annoyed for the sake of it. But that, you always wanted moments like that.
And have you ever worked with Roy Keane?
No, I have. I missed Mr. Roy Keane. He came after I'd left, but I've often wondered what he'd be like to work with.
Now, of course, you moved into this new job. It's a whole new ballgame, as we said. There's lots more money, lots more stars, and it's even more fame. And how did you manage to, you know, your Christian life in that? How difficult was it to be Christian in that kind of an atmosphere?
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's not easy for lots of us in lots of secular settings, wherever we're doing our work or spending our days. And you know, it is quite a macho world. Faith is not something that within this country players are that comfortable about talking about. But then you look at some of the South Americans, and they're very vocal and very, you know, expressive with their faith on the pitch. You sometimes see it when they score goals.
Brazilians in particular, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not an easy place, I would say, to be a Christian. You know, I'd sometimes find, you know, the language that was used, not obviously when we were on air, but around kind of games, the banter, as they used to call it. Sometimes you'd find it a little bit difficult, but it's about how you manage yourselves in those situations, and not to find yourself being dragged into it, because it's easier to fit in than not. And that was always something I tried to do, was like, the easiest thing to do is just go along with the flow, just be one of the boys, one of the lads. That way you fit in quicker. But actually that means compromising, because you're starting to then engage in conversations that aren't particularly, you know, Christian. They aren't particularly, you know, pleasing to God. So that was always the challenge, of just trying to not get too involved in the sort of banter that accompanies a lot of dressing rooms, which our dressing room obviously was the studio.
Yeah. And was there many temptations in that kind of lifestyle as well that came with it?
No, not really. I mean, it's just, I think because the whole way through I saw fame as being a fairly empty thing, a vacuous thing anyway. And I never saw myself really I always knew that when you did a live game, there's not a single football fan in the country who's tuning into that game because you're presenting it. They're tuning in because they want to watch the game. You know, even the great Des Lynam, who was my hero growing up in terms of television presenters, you know, no one tuned in to see Des. They loved Des and he was brilliant, but you would tune in because that's a game I want to watch today. And I think once you realize that no one's tuning in to look at you, it's almost, you are doing your job the best when people don't really notice you. They tend to notice you when you make a mistake, and that gets very public. But that's the secret to not letting it swell your ego and put you in places where life becomes very different. It's about seeing it for what it is. And I just saw myself as just someone there to facilitate getting on air, making it a really good watch, but ultimately we're about the game.
Wife? Do you have kids? Do you have anything in this world to fight for? I had completely forgotten that I was married. It had never even crossed my mind. I had completely forgotten that I had 4 children. None of that stuff had even crossed my mind because the pain was so over the top. But the second she said, what do you have to fight for? Do you have a wife? Do you have children? I realized right in that moment, right there, it wasn't later, it was right in that moment, I knew right then God was talking through her. And the same voice that had just said, if you want to live, you have to fight, it's going to be a hard fight, is now speaking through her, God the Holy Spirit, and he says, you know, do you have a wife? Do you have kids? Obviously he knows, but he's reminding me about my wife, about my kids. See, I couldn't fight for myself. It hurt too bad. There was no way. I was done. I would not have fought for myself. In fact, a couple times left. It was just up to me. But when God reminded me of my wife and my children, I would fight for them. I'd do anything for my wife and kids. And so she said, don't shut your eyes. Stay here, mister. Stay here. Don't shut your eyes. I'm thinking, lady, every time I shut my eyes, I'm going up there and there's a tunnel. I'm leaving. So you're right. I'm not going to shut my eyes. They ended up, they had called MedFlight, but unfortunately an ambulance didn't get called. And so there was no way to get me out to the helicopter. So the helicopter didn't even land. It just turned around and went back when it realized there was no ambulance. At that point, they called the ambulance. That was all while I was still in the ceiling, because I listened to all those conversations from above being said about, okay, the helicopter's going back. It's a 2-hour drive to where the helicopter was. A 2-hour drive. I don't know what that is in helicopter flight, but they went back. The ambulance came and picked me up, and it took me to a hospital 1/2 hour away. So I went to a hospital a half hour away, where it was just a spot for the helicopter to come back, pick me up, and they med-flighted me to our state, the state of Wisconsin, our biggest trauma center, and where I spent the next year. I had 5 major operations during the period of that time. The night of the accident, they brought in the guy, they called in the head trauma surgeon, called him from home, and he finished up the operation. He came out and told my wife that she could cross her fingers because he didn't expect me to live. He said, he told her in 11, at that point, it had been 11 years, I think. In 11 years of running that trauma department, he told my wife that he had never, ever seen a body so badly traumatized and make it to the hospital alive. He said he had no idea how I made it. And for anybody that's medical, for any people that are medical, this is one of the 2 huge miracles. I had 5 places that major arteries are severed. Now, we've had these documents, my medical records, looked at by lots and lots of TV shows and lots of people. And just recently, I've been told that I shouldn't say 5 arteries, that I should say 3 arteries, because there's a superior mesenteric artery, which is the biggest artery that goes in your midsection of your body for any human. Superior mesenteric artery, it follows along your small intestine. That artery is your biggest one, and mine was completely severed, absolutely cut through in 3 places, plus 2 other arteries severed in two other arteries. So that's a total of major arteries severed in 5 places, although it was one artery severed in 3 places, just to be completely specific and accurate for people listening. So I have major arteries severed 5 places, and that's 3 arteries severed, right? So I've bled out completely. I've completely bled out. God was doing something with those angels, and the doctor told my wife, I have no idea, how he made it here, because, and again, for medical people, it was over 2 hours from the point the truck fell on me, severed 5 places, major arteries, to the point that I get to the hospital and they're starting to put blood in me and they're going to operate on me. They say if you have 1 major artery severed, you got 8 to 10 minutes before you bleed to death and die. 1 major artery, 8 to 10 minutes, you're going to bleed to death and die at the most, is what I've been told. I had 5 places, 3 arteries, 5 places, and it was over 2 hours. So God was doing something crazy supernatural with those angels holding me together. So the doctors do their stuff. They tell my wife they don't expect me to live through the hour after they started they just scooped it all out, hooked the arteries back up, and then they told my wife they didn't expect me to live through the hour, that she should cross her fingers. My wife was a praying woman. She already had people assembled from our church. She brought people from our church. When she showed up, all she brought with her was her Bible to the hospital. And they said, we're not going to cross our fingers. We're going to thank God for every 30 minutes of life, because he only said I was going to live an hour. So they said, okay, you say he's only going to live an hour, then we're going to thank God for every 30 minutes of life. So every 30 minutes of life that I was still alive, they thank God all night long. And in the morning, I'm still alive. And my wife went back to the doctor and said, you said there's so much operations, a lot of operations need to be done. Are you going to go back in there and keep working? And they said, we didn't expect to live through the night. We still don't expect to live. 3 or 4 hours go by. My wife went and harassed them some more. They started operating on me, and they ended up operating on me on and off all week long. And the second huge miracle is this. Adults have, again, I apologize, I don't have all the metric conversions on this, but I do have a little bit. But adults have 18 to 24, 22, 24 feet length of small intestine. And so all of my small intestine was removed because it was damaged in the accident, except, and I do know the metric on this, except for, so it goes from 18 to 20 some feet of small intestine, which I don't know what that is in centimeters, but it goes all the way down to just a little over 100 centimeters. They saved 2 pieces of small intestine, and I had like 100 centimeters left. That's it. That's not enough to live on. So I'm dying in the hospital. I'm starving to death. I lose 65 pounds. I don't eat for months because there's nothing there. It's just into a plastic tube, into a bucket. And so they save a little bit, but it's not enough to live on. They're feeding me intravenously. I'm dying. God wakes up a man 2 mornings in a row at 5 a.m. who lived on the far coast, east coast of the United States. Woke him up 2 mornings in a row and said, buy a plane ticket, fly to Wisconsin, the state that I live in, pray for this guy, me, in the hospital, and I'm going to do a miracle. The guy said God told him that 2 mornings in a row. The first morning, he totally blew it off, but he did tell his wife, said, this is really crazy, and they just kind of laughed about it. The second morning when it happened, they immediately bought the ticket. He bought a instant ticket right on the spot, and for like almost $1,000 back then, like 900 some bucks that ticket cost him. He flew to Wisconsin, prayed for me in the hospital, and because the man, God chose to turn on the gift of healing in him right at that moment when he prayed for me in the hospital, God did a creative miracle, and I instantaneously, right on the spot, ended up with a total of half of my intestines length. So again, I'm not sure what centimeters length is on what centimeters length is for 22 feet or 24 feet, but I know they're saying I have at least 600 centimeters or more. So bottom line is 9, 7, it depends, because they can't tell exactly, because it's all, they said it's too circuitous to completely measure. In other words, it's like a ball of worms, your small intestine. It's all balled up. But they're saying basically I got half my intestines back when that man prayed. So like 9 to 11 feet of intestine, boom, out of nowhere. And it's the only reason why I'm alive, or I would have died already years ago. So between those 2 miracles alone, the 5 places major artery severed, and then the creative miracle in the intestines, the lady praying me back to life, the angels, you put all that together. I'd been called into ministry as a young man. Literally, I ran away. It was a Jonah call. I ran away like Jonah. God called me, but I ran away like Jonah. 18 years went by. The accident happens, and I finally was obedient. Finally went in the ministry. We started traveling around the world, telling this testimony, and we've been, giving it for the last however many years to whoever wants to listen. My message, if you boiled it all down to this, the bottom line for my message is this: God has to be real. God is a God of mercy. There's nothing that you've done that's too bad. You're not too far gone. There's nothing that, it's not too late. I literally was prayed back to life from the dead 3 times. That miracle's not going to last. There's going to come a day I'm going to die again. The only miracle that lasts is when somebody is going to receive Jesus as Lord and Savior, to have their sins washed away, so that the moment their spirit leaves their body like mine did, they get to go in that tunnel and go towards the light and get to go to heaven, where everything is going to be amazing forever. I just hope that encourages you guys.
Going back to the earlier question about when somebody said to you about we need more Christians in media. Did you meet many Christians in the media as you were going through your career?
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah. And they I mean, there was a kind of Christian union within the BBC. I could never really go because it always met on day when I was very rarely at the BBC. But yeah, I used to meet quite a few. I had quite a number of Christian friends at Sky, which was good. They were always nice. Good to be able to chat to them. And I hate saying because they were one of us, but you know what I mean. I know I can chat about this to them because they understand. So that was. I found that really helpful. One of my closest friend, Julia, who she was with Sky for years, and she's really, really good friends of both myself and Dorina. She was such a great support because I worked with her a lot, and knowing that she was a Christian as well, it was always a huge encouragement.
Yeah, excellent. Now, of course, of all the sports you've covered, and what is your own favorite sport?
Well, it is football. I mean, I love a lot of sport. If I had to say you can only ever watch one for the rest of your life, then it would be football. But I love cricket and rugby and athletics. But football's the main one.
Would that be Norwich City by any chance?
Yes, it would. Well, good research, George. Very good.
Yes, indeed. Well, you're better than I am. I'm a Sunderland supporter.
Oh, gosh.
Yes. Oh, gosh, is right. Now, of course, you were at the height of your career. Everything was going well for you. But, of course, a couple of years ago, things changed a little bit. Okay, there was a tragedy that happened. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can talk about it. It's now three and a half years ago. So it was the autumn of 2017, and yeah, everything life-wise was going well. I was second year of doing the Premier League, so I'd done the Football League for many years for Sky, and then got up to the top and got to do the Premier League. So I was into the second season, really enjoying it. My boy Ethan was 8 at the time, and just had this very weird autumn period where I began to get struck down by some mental health issues. I'd had depression once before in my life, but I began to really struggle quite badly with anxiety. It really came out of nowhere. I just remember waking up one morning and I was doing a show in the evening for Sky called The Debate, which was just an hour-long show where you debate the main kind of football talking points of the day, and we all would have to do one of these a week. But a very simple show, you know, if you're an experienced broadcaster, nothing to get worried about. You just got 2 football players there who can talk for England, and on you go with it. But I just woke up and felt this real anxious feeling in the stomach, you know, that feeling you might get before a really important exam, kind of that knotted anxiety. And that started to become a really regular thing. Anytime I was doing any work, this anxiety used to come in, and yet I'd never have a problem. You know, I've done playoff finals in the Championship, you know, I've done big games in the Premier League, and yeah, there'd be that healthy adrenaline kick when you go on air, but no anxiety at all. But suddenly everything was becoming very anxious. And then into that came panic attacks. I started to have panic attacks quite regularly before games. And so by late October of 2017, the decision was made to take me away from the studio for a while to get some help to overcome these problems, because they just became debilitating. Anybody watching this who's dealt with mental health problems will know that one of the things that anxiety or depression or panic attacks do is they make what was once totally possible feel impossible. So your work that you've done for the best part of 10, 11 years with Sky now feels like your enemy. Something that you could almost do in your sleep is now like scaling Mount Everest. So I was taken out of the firing line. And then amidst all that, so I was sort of getting some professional counselling. I did go down the medication route. So it was all about trying to get me better. And then amidst all that, my late wife, Gemma, started to develop these headaches that became ever more increasing and longer, and we started to do, and she had fatigue, and so we did some trips to the doctors, and they felt it was all wrapped up in the stress of seeing me like I was, and then everything kind of just developed very quickly over a week. She went into accident emergency on a Monday night in Reading, where we lived at the time, and by the Tuesday she's been diagnosed with, thankfully it's a rare form of blood cancer, but it's called acute myeloid leukemia, which develops very, very rapidly. They felt at the time she may have only had it for 4 to 5 weeks. So that's how quickly it develops. And the difficulty with blood cancer is that symptoms can often be very varied. So picking up on it is not always easy. And then due to a complication that occurred by the end of the week, she'd gone, and she was only 40. So yeah, in the space of a very, very small amount of time, your world's been turned on its axis, and everything's changed.
And how did you manage to cope with all that tragedy at one time? And how did you manage to get the message across to your son, Ethan?
Well, it was, I mean, he in the early stages was the single biggest reason why you have to get on with it. And, you know, I was a mess for quite a long time. You know, it's something like this can't fail to affect you. So I really got through that period through him, but also just having an incredibly amazing supportive group of family and friends who kind of carried me and him through those first few weeks and months. It was a really, really tough period. You know, everything that felt certain now feels incredibly uncertain. It's a very fear-filled time, and a time when you're questioning everything. You're questioning God, you're questioning what on earth is this faith all about? You know, where are you, God, in all this? Everything's coming at you at a million miles an hour. Yeah, it's a really, really difficult thing to go through. And
how's Ethan doing now at the moment?
He's amazing, actually. He's just such a, yeah, I often say this, is that if you looked at him in the playground and said, pick out the kid who's lost his mum at the age of 8, I would I bet a decent amount of money people would struggle to pick him out unless they actually asked him. He's very, very happy. And I think a lot of that security. So I've been with Dorina now for 2 years, and she's been such an amazing figure in my life. I love her to bits, but she's been remarkable with Ethan. So she's, you know, when a kid goes through something like this, essentially everything that felt like a sure foundation feels like it's shaking. And they become very, very worried about you, as in the surviving parent, because they look at you and they know deep down, if something happens to you, they have no parents left. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's the truth. It is the reality. So he needed security, and she's provided so much of that for him. And you know, loving a child who's not your own is hard. It is hard, but she has just been full of grace and love and compassion. And I'd say, you know, I've obviously helped a little bit, and God's helped massively, but you know, to see him now embracing life and enjoying it, and see that smile on his face, there's always going to be that pain there. That pain will always be there for him, and it will travel with him for the rest of his days. But that doesn't mean you can't still embrace life. And I think this came very early on, where I worked out what this probably life would be like for him going forward. And we were, as I said, so well supported by so many people, but like the world of football were just amazing. I remember getting a really powerful, very touching letter from Maurizio Pochettino, who was the Spurs boss at the time, you know, written himself. It wasn't one of those club generated letters with a computerized signature. Just a lovely letter. I didn't really know the bloke. I'd seen him a couple of times to say hello to at White Hart Lane. And then in the March of 2018, so a few months later, the FA got in touch, said, would Ethan like to be an England mascot for the game against Italy in a few weeks' time? I was like, yeah, I would love that. And I remember that night when this kind of really struck me. So, you know, just seeing Ethan walk out and just the look on his face as he emerged from that tunnel, because I was very lucky. I was able to stand right by the tunnel as he came out, and I could watch him standing there on the halfway line as the anthems went out, and just looking around this. Those are the days where we could have fans in the stadiums, like all of them. So there's 90,000 fans there. And just an amazing moment, just full of such pride for him. And we got back in the car later that night. He's very, very tired. He's still in his England kit. And just before he dropped off, I said, how was that? How was it? He said, oh, it's just amazing. He said, it's the most amazing thing I've done. And he said, but I just feel so sad that Mummy wasn't here to see it. And I think in that moment, I understood really for him what life will be like going forward. And that is that there's going to be two things traveling together through his life, which is the joy of experiences like that, the joy of, you know, being able to go on holiday, whatever it might be, the joy of hanging out with his cousins. But alongside that will always be that pain of the loss of his mum. And I think once you get that into your head, you begin to understand how you can move forward in life. But also move forward for him without forgetting what came before.
Life Stories. Stories.